Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Joining us here on the program today is the author of a wonderful book titled Wild Chickens and Petty Tyrants. He's joining us here on the program today, who is founder of Exquisite Mind in Burlington, Vermont, where he practices mindful-based psychotherapy and teaches meditation. He's also been named one of the 50 best spiritual books of 2009 by Spirituality and Practice magazine, and since 1985, when he took the Bodhisattva vows from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, he has practiced meditation, yoga, and psychology. Today he's going to be talking with us about his 108 metaphors for mindfulness and how it can help us be here in the moment. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Arnie Kozak. Dr. Kozak, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here.
Now, how did you come about these metaphors here for mindfulness? They're quite interesting and simple all at the same time, but really take a lot of doing when you really think about it.
Well, anybody who's in the business of teaching mindfulness, as I've been, just naturally uses metaphors. Mm-hmm. And if you read any of the books on other great books on mindfulness and Buddhism, you'll see it's full of metaphors. And the Buddha himself actually used metaphors quite a bit when he was teaching. So we really can't separate the metaphors from the message, as it were. And when it comes to something like dealing with our minds, we really do have to refer to metaphors. So that's where I've just taken that and made it a more explicit approach.
Mm-hmm. Now, where did a lot of these metaphors come from? Some of them I understand, I believe that you actually created, but then mm-hmm. others you just had found or they've been used here or there. Tell us about that.
Well, as you're saying, some of them are classic metaphors actually used by the Buddha himself, like the metaphor of the two arrows or the string that is not too tight or not too slack. Those are ancient metaphors. And others have been shown up in Buddhist literature over the centuries, like the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon itself, and a variety of others. Some of the metaphors, though, have come out of my actual teaching work or my psychotherapy work with people where we come up with a metaphor right on the spot to deal with a particular problem. And we're borrowing things from domains which are familiar to them that will help them to illuminate their understanding of mindfulness. And that's an exciting process when we can do that, so we can come up with new metaphors or make linkages between things that we wouldn't otherwise make linkages between to help them to understand or to help them to work through a problem.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dr. Kozak, describe for our listeners what mindfulness is.
Well, mindfulness is really about how we pay attention, and it's both a way of paying attention, and it's also a practice in and of itself. So it's paying attention to what's actually happening now and being able to give that our full attention without any interference from thoughts about the future or thoughts about the past or the internal talk or images that tend to be in our mind fairly constantly. So it's this ability to make contact with whatever is happening in the moment, and when we do so, we're in a place of mindfulness. And mindfulness also is an approach to meditation. We can actually practice what we call mindfulness meditation, where we train our minds to be able to recognize where attention goes and redirect attention to something happening in the present, which usually will include the process of our breathing or other sensations that are present in the body.
Mm-hmm. Now, describe what the benefits of being mindful is. I can give you, for instance, my own example from years ago. I remember I was out with my children. We were originally fishing, and then eventually it turned into swimming and goofing off in the heat of the day. But I was so distracted by a troubling thought that I didn't feel present and really enjoying the moment. And I really look back on that day and say to myself, oh my goodness, why have I lost the miracle of just being here, being tied up with something that in the end wasn't as bad as I thought it was in the first place.
Well, you bring up the central point right there, Daniel. It's living our lives. It's the capacity to be mindful gives us the opportunity to experience our lives in the full richness that they are, without obscuring it or to being distracted by, again, to being preoccupied with some worry or a story. It's really being in contact with our life. So we get more enjoyment out of life. We get more vividness out of life when we can be mindful. And that's really what we have. That's sort of the currency we have to spend in our life is this present moment. And are we there for it, or are we somewhere else? So that's one of the benefits.
Okay.
By doing so, we tend to also be able to help in the process of managing stress and regulating our emotions. So it also just helps us to cope better with situations as well, when we can have this ability to redirect our attention to what's happening in the present. One of the metaphors that I think this one is somewhat original to me. I haven't seen it elsewhere. If we think about the present moment, like a vacuum chamber, if we think about it in terms of a vacuum chamber, and so in a vacuum chamber there's no oxygen, so a fire couldn't burn in a vacuum chamber. And if we liken anxiety or stress to that fire, it needs oxygen to burn, and it gets that oxygen from the future. Anticipating and worrying and all the stories and ruminations that we have, or it gets it from the past where we're rehashing things and going over them again and again. So in the present moment, in that we create that vacuum chamber where that fire can't burn. So it's almost impossible to be stressed or anxious if our attention is fully in the present moment.
Especially in this day and age, we all seem to be preoccupied with cell phones. Has somebody called me? Have I gotten a text? Have I sent a text? I mean, everybody seems to be distracted.
Yeah.
You know, and although there was an interesting article in our local paper I remember reading about 2 or 3 months ago, and it was talking about how with this new age of the Internet and how they have these things such as Facebook, MySpace, and the like, that, yeah, we're building wider communities, but then the author of the book they were actually reviewing was suggesting that they're becoming shallower. And, you know, I think mindfulness is one of those things that can really bring deep connections, not just with people, but with yourself. Could you describe how that is with today's technology?
Well, yeah, I think you're right on with the assessment of the technology. I don't really think that we're built as biological beings to know hundreds or thousands of people in the ways that we would through social media. And I also think that the accessibility that technology has created, and then the expectations for accessibility it's created for us to always be available to a text, to a call, to an email, just creates a lot of stress for us. This is a whole new way of being, and I'm not sure that it's compatible with our basic, biological construction. So, if we think about mindfulness, or if we think about ourselves, we're supposed to be human beings, right?
Right.
But if you actually look at what we do, it looks like we're more like human doings. We're human thinking, we're human worrying, but we're not really doing much being, just being. And I think all these technologies get in the way of being. And so we have to have some counterbalance, I think, to cultivate some kind of quiet or silence in our lives so that we can offset or unplug from all of that technology. And then mindfulness provides a vehicle for doing that. Now, at the same time, I'm not anti-technology, and a lot of mindfulness teachers are using the computer and the Internet to actually as a vehicle for teaching and for reaching out, and it can function in the role of a community of like-minded beings, what the Buddha called the Sangha, as well, connecting people in remote ways. Mm-hmm. But if we never unplug, then that could be a problem.
Well, I noticed as I brought that up, it isn't so much the internet and the computer, but it's the advent of the cell phone. And, for instance, recently I was at a birthday party with a bunch of teenagers, and I don't think there was a moment that passed I didn't see one of those teens with a cell phone out texting or doing something on it. And, you're looking at a dozen teenagers here at this party, and I'm thinking to myself, who do you need to be talking to right now where you're not here for this person? It just was blowing my way, the habits that we're beginning to see happen.
Yeah, they're twittering their friends at the party about the party.
Exactly, or somebody else that isn't there, who knows?
Yeah. It creates this interesting phenomenon where the twittering and the updates on Facebook, you're commenting on your life, so you're abstracting on your life in this way. And it shifts us. I think it moves us in a way that is away from mindfulness. And William James, the great psychologist, founding American psychologist, said about 100 years ago that our intellectual life consists almost wholly in our substituting a conceptual order for the perceptual order in which our experience originally lives. Mm-hmm. So we are up in this conceptual order. We're thinking about things or abstracting things, and so when you're texting and sending out all these status updates, we're in this conceptual order, this sort of narrative storyline of our lives, and we're really not in full connection with the actual experience of it. Mm-hmm. And that's what mindfulness practice offers, is a way for us to cultivate a familiarity and an access to the perceptual order of our life, what's actually happening, our sensory experiences and the fullness of each moment.
Now, you titled your book Wild Chickens and Petty Tyrants. Tell us about the title.
Well, imagine that you're going off to some exotic place to study meditation, and you've got an image that this is going to be a really conducive place to practice meditation. And when you get there and you're in your little hut in the woods to meditate all day long, along with you are dozens of wild chickens who are screeching and squawking all day long. They just make a constant racket. So this is an actual story of one of my meditation teachers, Larry Rosenberg, who I've learned a lot from over the years. He went to Thailand and encountered these wild chickens. So wild chickens is a metaphor for all the situations in our life that are unexpected, unwanted, things that we just are driving us crazy, that we have to deal with. So it's a challenge to acceptance. And the wild chickens bring up this possibility of can we accept what's happening in this particular moment in our life. Mm-hmm. The Petty Tyrants is a more personified version of the wild chickens, and that comes from one of Carlos Castaneda's books. And a petty tyrant is somebody who might have a lot of power over us to make our lives miserable, or maybe somebody who just drives us to distraction. And usually we get pretty preoccupied with the other person, what they're doing and how they're making our lives miserable and how they shouldn't be doing it. But the petty tyrant also serves this other function, again, in the direction of acceptance, of showing us things about ourselves that are probably useful for us to know, where it sort of highlights our implicit rule book. And this is another metaphor. We've got this whole implicit agenda that we carry around in our minds about how things should be, how things should go. And it's like a rule book that people should do this, I should do this, and things should happen this way. And then when they don't, we get very upset. And so to the extent that we have a very elaborate set of rules, and we're very attached to those rules, need them to go a certain way, we're going to be unhappy and stressed and dissatisfied quite a bit. So petty tyrants could actually provide a useful function for us to help us to illustrate where those rules are and give us an opportunity to take a look at them.
Fascinating stuff here. I know that, when it comes to mindfulness, again, we talk a lot about how most of us don't really seem to be present here in the moment and realize that living in one continuous moment, infinite moment that is, you really begin to experience a lot of opportunity, a lot of miraculous possibility. And when you think of people who are, especially as this show addresses people approaching or moving past middle age, is there at a point now where, unlike when we were younger, where we thought we had all the time in the world, so we'll just put something off until tomorrow, so we just expect a tomorrow to come. As we get older, as we're approaching our 50s and 60s, we start realizing our time isn't as infinite as we used to believe.
Right.
Now would be a time when mindfulness can be the most important.
Well, sure. It's like peak oil. You get to a certain point, and then you're on the other side of that, and the pressure or the awareness that yes, time is precious is there, and how do we want to spend those moments? Because those are the things that we have to spend. As I said earlier, that's our currency, is the present moment. So, do we want to spend it worrying? Do we want to spend it regretting, or talking over our experience? Because we do that a lot too. I mean, we can be oriented to the present. Oh yeah, I'm paying attention. I'm here at the beach, and I'm looking at the sunset, and this is great. And I wish, Sadie was here to see this with me. And we can be talking over the experience, and that's another one of my metaphors that I came up with. The DVD commentary. When you watch a movie on a DVD, and you can put it on the director's commentary mode. So the director comes on, and the movie sort of fades out in the background, and the director and some of the actors, they talk over the movie. They say, "Oh, in this scene, this is what we were doing, and over here we were doing this." But so the movie becomes remote. It's in the background, and we're talking over the movie, and that struck me as well. That's exactly how we spend our lives. We're talking over the movie of our lives. We're really not there to enjoy it, and that's all we've got. So we can think about. I mean, we have this basic choice between our thinking or storytelling self, or our remembering self, and our experiencing self. And that experiencing self is what's happening in this moment. And there is, as you said, there's a richness there, and there's maybe even a miracle there. And what might happen if we're actually paying attention? Because attention is very limited. We have an overblown idea about how our attention operates. So attention is really not quite as responsive as we tend to think it is, and just do an easy experiment with that. Try to concentrate on something, anything at all, any object, just like maybe pick up a golf ball and look at a golf ball, and how long is it before your mind jumps into the future, the past, or starts talking about this experience? Typically, it's about 1 to 2 seconds for people. So our attention is really not particularly robust. It's not particularly well trained. And it also, when we're paying attention, we seem to be actually paying quite attentive. And there seems to be a continuity to our consciousness. And there's a metaphor I borrow from the late psychologist Julian Jaynes, who talked about if you ask a flashlight in a dark room, what's the nature of the room, it will say it's bright, because everywhere it turns, there seems to be light. So our attention is actually fairly limited, but gives us this sense that it's bigger than it is. But if we can train it, if we can actually train our attention to be more focused and to be more expansive, then we will notice more. We will pick up on more, and we might be more open to possibility, and certainly more open to things that are happening to us, the joyful moments and the moments with grief in them as well.
Now let's talk about the metaphors themselves. Now in your book you have it divided into different sections, but just to let the listeners know that in the book Wild Chickens and Petty Tyrants that you can pretty much jump to any metaphor. It isn't that you have to read, from point A to point B. And
Right.
Would you find that your book would probably be, if you will, more effective if they do it that way, where they just kind of maybe one day open up to a particular page and read that metaphor, maybe set of metaphors, or how would you suggest people actually use the book?
Right, they can do it in either way or both. And some people tell me they just pick it up randomly, and they'll find something that's really useful for them at that particular moment. So you could read it cover to cover. It doesn't take long at first, and then go back and forth and just skip through it. One of the local newspapers did a review of it and likened it to the bathroom book for metaphors of mindfulness. Something you could just pick up and read a little bit of, and you'll find something in there that will help you with a particular problem or with your day. So it really can be flexible in that way. And people will find their favorite metaphors and ones that they'll really be able to start to integrate and will help them to frame their understanding of mindfulness, and if they're going to do some mindfulness practice, can also help them to do the mindfulness practice. And also in the book, in the appendix, there are instructions for doing mindfulness meditation as well, if people are interested.
Mm-hmm. Now, meditation is a practice that helps people to begin to quiet their mind to a point that we're at a point of mindfulness, really being present here and now.
Yeah.
Now, there was a set of metaphors in the beginning of your book, Metaphors for the Mind, that I really enjoyed reading because of how you talk about, or the metaphors describe, the levels of the mind actually sort of quieting while still being what the mind does, which is running around with thoughts all day, and that is doggy mind and monkey mind, lion mind, and then your friendly neighborhood spider mind. Let's talk about those briefly and what's going on there.
Sure. Well, our natural default way of being is that our mind is going to be full of thoughts. We're going to be thinking quite a lot, and our mind is running all over the place, jumping from tree to tree like a monkey or chasing after bones like a retriever, and it's just running after anything that comes across its path. And when we do practice, we try to quiet the mind. And I want to issue a caveat there, Daniel, that, and this is a common misconception, or maybe it not so much as a misconception as a pitfall for meditation practices. If you're understanding is that I've got to sit down and clear my mind of thoughts, people can become very frustrated with meditation because the mind isn't going to clear itself of thoughts.
No.
Because that doggy mind is still doing its thing and all these things happen. So the goal really, I would restate, is become familiar with what your mind is doing. Mm-hmm. So you see the nature of the mind to generate a lot of these thoughts and jump into the future and the past, and it's talking and generating images, and it's doing all these things. It's all over the place. So we have the ability to recognize that and see that and then bring it back and keep bringing it back. So the goal really of mindfulness practice is to see that we've moved away from the present and to come back. It's not necessarily to sit still in the present and not move from that point. Once we've done that for a while, the mind will naturally become concentrated. Just like if we do exercise, our muscles will become toned and fit. So our faculties of attention will become more concentrated, and we will be more lion-like in our attention. We can concentrate, and we won't chase after everything that crosses our path. And that, we'll call that concentration, or in the Eastern languages, samadhi, is that state. But if you try to get there too fast, or if you make that your goal, people tell me all the time, oh, I can't meditate. I tried meditation. I can't do that. And I say, well, what happened? Well, my mind was all over the place. I'm like, really? Well, I don't see the problem, because that's a normal mind. And did you write, so I just help to have people see that tendency and just work with it. And once we give up that agenda, again, that kind of rule book I talked about earlier, so we would apply that to meditation. Okay, I'm meditating, so I expect it to go a certain way. I'm going to have lots of relaxed feelings and maybe even a little bliss, and I'm going to get very concentrated, and my mind is going to go blank, and that's what meditation is. And we've got that image in our mind, and then we sit down, and maybe it resembles that, and great, but more likely it's going to be something different. And then that can become a point of frustration if we're really attached to that.
Mm-hmm. I remember watching a documentary on Bruce Lee, The Warrior's Journey, and his wife was describing an inscription he had given her. I believe it was a necklace on the back, and he had written, "Having no way is way." And she said that a lot of people, especially Westerners, tended not to really understand what that means, because to them it meant, oh, you could just kind of do whatever you want, without being responsible for it. But having no way is way is exactly a way of saying or describing what mindfulness is, as you just described about how we have expectations of outcomes or situations being the way we want them, and then find ourselves disappointed rather than enjoying things as they are.
Yeah, exactly. That's beautiful, and very very similar to what the one of the Zen patriarchs say: the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. And again, that can be misconstrued to be, well, does that mean I become indifferent or apathetic or blank and I lose my personality? No, it just means that we aren't pushed around by these agendas and these rules that we have for everything. That we actually can deal with what happens. And of course, I use the example, if you're sitting in a room and it's cold and the window is open, and you can easily get up and shut the window, that's fine. Go shut the window. But if you're out waiting at a bus stop, you can't shut the window. So we have to be able to learn how to work with what is happening and accept what's happening. And these agendas and these rules that we have can become quite tyrannical, and we don't recognize just how attached we are to them. So that meditation practice really reveals all of that and gives us an alternative. And my students sometimes ask, well, what will I be like if I give up all my preferences, go into that no way way of being? And I came up with the statement, we are human beings who take form through an impetus to joy, interest, and concern. So we don't become apathetic. I mean, if you've ever been around, especially the Tibetan Buddhist monks, they're incredibly joyful. They're laughing. His Holiness is laughing all the time. They're very free. It's a very freeing experience to get away from these agendas and all the rules and all the shoulds. And then we're moved by things that are of interest to us or that bring us joy, or we get beyond our own self-preoccupation and we can actually be more compassionate towards others. So,
now, I was going to ask you that you have a, psychotherapy practice, how you use mindfulness to help people, and do you find it to be relatively successful using that approach?
Sure. Well, I use it in a variety of different ways. It's become an explicit part of my psychotherapy practice. So sometimes people are referred by their physicians for mindfulness-based work, where they know about mindfulness or they've heard about mindfulness and want to try it. So when I work individually, one-on-one with people, I'll explain mindfulness to them. I'll teach them how to do it. I'll give them guided meditation CDs to practice with. I'll have them read the book, and then I'll really help them to integrate that into their lives and how to use it to work with the problems that they have, which might be chronic medical problems, stress, chronic pain, marital difficulties, whatever it is that they're confronting. And I also teach groups and workshops, so 8-week groups, mindfulness-based stress reduction groups, and workshops that are based on my book. So there's a variety of different ways that people can learn the practice. And when somebody's been suffering for quite some time and has been through the traditional medical system and really hasn't gotten a lot of relief, they tend to be fairly open to mindfulness. And my results seem to corroborate what the research literature has been showing over the past 30 years, that this is a very effective modality for helping people to reduce stress, to improve their ability to cope with negative emotions and to cope with chronic pain or an illness, if that's what's going on for them. And there's some very exciting research that's been coming out in the last few years documenting through brain imaging the changes that are occurring in the brain when people are engaging with the mindfulness meditation.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting how our thoughts can truly make us sick.
Well, it's probably not a stray thought here or there, but chronic patterns of thinking, definitely, because the way in which we engage our minds will have a direct influence on our stress system. So the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, when we tend to worry, we're authorizing the brain to initiate the stress response. And we can spend our whole lives, much of our life, in a state of elevated stress, chronic stress overload. And that's not the way that our stress systems are designed to work. They're designed to work to deal with acute stressors. So a crisis comes up and we deal with it and then it shuts off. But a lot of times especially in modern society, it never shuts off. And so then we're really subject to a lot of stress-related illnesses. It can affect cardiovascular function, diabetes. It can really wreak havoc on our systems.
The book is Wild Chickens and Petty Tyrants. Our guest today, Dr. Arnie Kozak. Could you give a website out for our listeners where they can find out more about mindfulness and wonderful metaphors where they can find themselves moving in that direction?
Sure. They can go to my website, which is www.exquisitemind.com, and I have links to a variety of other websites and useful information and a blog and a variety of other things, and they can also find out about my upcoming trainings off of the website. So that's exquisitemind.com.
Dr. Arnie Kozak, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
You're very welcome.
We also want to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in. Again, the book is Wild Chickens and Petty Tyrants. Also be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. Also be sure to visit us at our blog where we archive our shows and have great multimedia information for you to enjoy, use, and even pass on to others. We thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.